Disney's The Lion King was filled with fierce lions and even fiercer lionesses, with two arguably being the most dangerous big cats in all the Pride Lands and beyond. I'm talking, of course, about Sarabi and Zira, the former queen of the Pride Lands and former leader of the Outlanders, respectively. Even though the two never shared any actual screen time together, they both backed their kings up with their sharp claws and were always ready for action. But did you know that there might be a much deeper connection between Zira and Sarabi than the two of them both simply being alpha predators? Now, before we get into the relationship, it's important to address one of the more popular Lion King fan theories based on family trees and their unlikelihood. The relationship in question is an unspoken connection that some fans think exists between Zira and another lioness, Nala. You see, there are some theories that suggest that Nala and Zira were sisters, which was partially why Zira held so much contempt towards Simba's family. According to the theory, her anger came not only from the loss of Scar, but also from her own sister Nala allowing her husband, Simba, to exile her and her family from the Pride Lands. Now, as interesting as this theory is, it's one that's been pretty easy for other Lion King fans to debunk. For starters, the way that Zira acted in The Lion King 2 Simba's Pride seemed like the actions of a much older lion. She was wise and angry, but because she knew that she wasn't in her prime anymore and couldn't face Simba on her own, she instead trained her stronger and more athletic children to do the job for her. This means that the odds of Zira and Nala coming from the same generation are very remote, and it's much more likely that Zira was quite a bit older than Nala was. Another great example that would suggest that Zira was quite a bit older than Nala was the fact that Zira had a thing for Scar. While it wasn't confirmed in the movie whether or not Zira and Scar had an actual relationship, there's no arguing that she was obsessed with the villainous former king of the Pride Lands. In fact, according to the creative director of Disney at the time, Scar and Zira were originally written as a couple with Kovu being their child. The only reason that they didn't follow through with that storyline is because it would make the Kiara-Kovu relationship pretty weird. You see, if Scar and Zira were mates and had Kovu together, then that would make Kovu Kiara's cousin, which nobody wants to happen. That's why in the final cut of the movie it was written that Zira raised Kovu and the other children upon Scar's request, but Scar was not Kovu's father. It doesn't dismiss the fact that Zira was clearly obsessed with Scar during The Lion King 2, which, in this case, suggests that she was from Scar's generation rather than the generation that included Simba and Nala. Now, speaking of the fact that Zira was an elderly lion, or at least seemed like she was by the time the sequel rolled around, it's important to also note that there's a chance that she wasn't the biological mother of any of the cubs that she raised. In fact, there's another fan theory out there that suggests that Scar brought Nuka, Vitani, and Kovu to Zira so that she could raise them instead of their actual mothers. This idea actually connects with another theory that actually involved Nala herself. You may have heard of the theory that claims that Nala actually had a child with Scar who turned out to be Vitani. However, according to the theory, when Simba returned, Nala gave up her daughter when she started her family with her new husband and king of Pride Rock. It's suggested in the theory that Zira agreed to raise Vitani because she was Scar's cub, and Zira wanted to prove her love for Scar, which, if that's true, would once again suggest that Zira was from Scar's older generation. Now, if Zira was actually around the same age that Scar and Mufasa were supposed to be in the second movie, there's almost no way that she could be Nala's sister. Their ages simply differed too much. So what does this have to do with the relationship between Zira and Sarabi? Well, there's a good chance that even though they were never shown on screen together, Sarabi and Zira likely came from the same generation as each other, making it possible that the pair of lionesses were related to each other. You see, there has actually been some fan speculation in the past that claimed that Sarabi and Zira were related. Unfortunately, there's no actual content within the context of The Lion King that confirms or denies this. So it's important to note that all of this is just theory, or rather a collection of theories, and nothing should be considered canon unless Disney says otherwise. Now, there's a fan theory that suggests that both Zira and Sarabi came from the same litter of lions. However, only one of them would go on to marry the great King Mufasa. Another thing worth noting before I continue is that there is absolutely zero canon information about Sarabi's family history aside from her connection to Mufasa and his family. No one knows for sure who her parents were, and the same can be said for Zira. It doesn't exactly mean that the two were related, but it does open the window of possibility for the two to actually have been sisters, since no one knows any of their lineage. For all we know, they could be from the same people, or lions. Now, what exactly would be the point of The Lion King connecting Zira to Sarabi and her family like that? Well, it would help explain a bit more as to why Zira held so much contempt for Simba and his family in The Lion King 2, other than the obvious fact that she was mad about Scar being usurped and then shortly after mauled to death by the hyenas that he once reigned over. It always felt like Zira's anger towards Simba was more personal. According to this theory, that personal hatred wasn't necessarily toward Simba, but actually toward his mother Sarabi, and by default Sarabi's son as well. Interestingly enough, according to this theory, it's believed that much of Zira's hatred and anger actually stemmed from jealousy toward her sister. As I mentioned before, Zira was clearly obsessed with and possibly even in love with Scar, so much so that she was willing to die in order to see the Pride Lands restored to the kingdom that he wanted it to be. Well, in the live-action remake of The Lion King, Scar made a really interesting comment towards Sarabi that surely would have rubbed Zira the wrong way if she knew about it. In the movie, Scar suggested that he wanted to make Sarabi his queen, but she refused him, which he was clearly bitter about. Well, according to this theory, the fact that Scar was potentially in love with her own sister made Zira furious and jealous beyond belief. Although Sarabi clearly wanted nothing to do with Scar or any of his advances toward her, if Zira was her sister and knew about that, she would definitely feel some sort of resentment towards Sarabi. That being said, jealousy alone wouldn't have been enough for Zira to turn her back on her family like that. At least I hope it wouldn't be. However, when you add in the fact that Simba, Sarabi's son, not only took the throne from Scar but also made the moves that led to Scar's death, the scale starts to shift the other way, and I can totally see where that anger came from. Then, toss in the fact that shortly after Scar's passing, Simba forced Zira and the rest of Scar's followers out of the Pride Lands and banished them from entering ever again. If this was all done by her own relative, it would make sense where all of her anger was truly flowing from. Now, let's add some context from the Lion Guard and other Lion King sources that spelled out Zira's relationship with Scar a bit more. According to the story told to Kion in the Lion Guard, before Scar killed Mufasa and was crowned the king of the Pride Lands, he lived among Zira and many of the other Outlanders. However, when he became the king, he left them to join the rest of the Pride. And if the theory that Zira was Sarabi's sister who loved Scar was true, then that move surely would have hurt her. To be left by the one she loved, only to watch him go to their ancestral home and make advances toward her own sister would probably be pain that only build up more anger and hate within Zira. But do you know what's really interesting about the idea of Zira and Sarabi being sisters? If Zira and Sarabi were actually related, as the theory suggests, then their relationship would sort of mirror Scar and Mufasa's relationship. While Sarabi clearly grew up as the larger, more popular, and more accepted lion, Zira likely would have been on the outside of her pride, much like Scar was with his. Then, as they grew up, rather than Zira being betrothed to Mufasa, who at the time was the prince of the Pride Lands and heir to the throne, Sarabi was the one who was chosen. This means that Zira was technically passed over for the crown, much like Scar was when his father Ahadi passed the throne down to Mufasa. Then, following a series of life events that led her to the outskirts of the Pride Lands, she ended up becoming a loner, much like Scar was. Furthermore, after her one chance at becoming the queen of the Pride Lands fell into the chasm filled with angry hyenas and was eaten alive, she was banished to the Outlands. It was there that she became the oddly charismatic leader of essentially her own pride, which once again mirrored the way that Scar became the leader of the hyenas when Mufasa essentially cast him aside. Now, as I mentioned before, the idea that Sarabi and Zira were related is nothing more than a fan theory, and it's highly unlikely that Disney will ever confirm whether it's true or not. Let's face it, Zira and Sarabi's lineage was never going to be the focal point of a Disney film, but still, you can't deny that these odd connections are intriguing. What do you think though? Is there any chance that Zira is actually Sarabi's sister, or is it just a fan theory? Be sure to let me know what you think about the relationship in the comments below.